Some families pass down heirlooms. Others pass down secrets. Mine left me both, and one of them could destroy us all. Alright, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. I'm Mara, and the day I opened my late husband's box, I found the secret that could tear my family apart. The restaurant was one of those polished places where the plates were bigger than the portions, and the waiters carried themselves like they were guarding state secrets. The candles on my cake flickered in the dim light, their glow reflected in the wine glasses surrounding me. 65 years old. A lifetime of memories and mistakes packed into a single number. Across the table, my son Liam was smiling, but it wasn't the relaxed, boyish smile I remembered from his childhood. It was tighter now, something forced. The kind of smile you wear when you're trying to keep the peace. His wife, Jodie, sat beside him, beautiful, poised, and dangerous in the way a storm cloud is dangerous when you're out at sea. She tapped her spoon against her glass. The chatter faded. She flashed me a smile that didn't touch her eyes. I just want to say how grateful we are to have Mara with us, she began. 65 years young, and still full of energy. A polite ripple of applause from the table. Then her tone shifted, just a little, but enough that I caught it. And honestly, we should all admire her. Not many people can still live off their son at her age. That's a talent. It was said with that lilting, I'm just joking voice, the kind people use when they want to hurt you but keep their hands clean. The table erupted in nervous laughter. Even Liam let out a short chuckle before glancing at me like he wasn't sure what he'd just agreed to. My heart gave a small, tired twist. I'd heard worse, but never from my own family in front of strangers. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the burn settle my nerves, and forced my mouth into a smile. Well, I said, I suppose some people collect coins or stamps. I just collect generosity. More laughter, lighter this time, but it was hollow to me. The candles kept burning, the wax pooling at the base like little white tears. I blew them out in one breath. I didn't make a wish. I hadn't made one in years. Dinner rolled on, appetizers cleared, mains served, conversations blooming again, but I felt apart from it all. The clinking of cutlery sounded sharper, the laughter more brittle. Halfway through my dessert, I excused myself, weaving through the tables toward the restroom. But I didn't go there. Instead, I slipped outside into the cool evening air. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement. I reached up to the silver chain around my neck and slid it free. Hanging from it was a single, worn brass key, warm from where it had rested against my skin. I rolled it between my fingers. The key to the drawer I hadn't opened in over a year. The drawer with the box. The box with the letters. The people in that restaurant thought they knew me, a lonely widow leaning on her son. But they didn't know about the drawer. They didn't know about the things I'd kept hidden, the truths I'd protected, the quiet war I'd been fighting for years. I slipped the key back under my blouse and walked inside, my smile perfectly in place. The house breathed differently at night. Floorboards that kept quiet during the day exhaled with weightless creaks. The refrigerator muttered to itself like an old friend retelling the same story. I set my purse on the hall table and stood there a moment, listening, as if the walls might have advice. In the mirror, the restaurant's soft lighting had been kind to me, the foyer bulb was not. I slipped the chain over my head, feeling the warmth of the brass key against my palm. The key had lived beneath my blouse for so long the shape of it felt like a second heartbeat. The study door gave in with a sigh. I didn't turn on the overhead. Just the lamp, its amber circle pooling over papers, dust glimmering like gentle snowfall. The desk, Daniel's desk, then mine, still wore a watermark from the summer he put a too-cold glass down without a coaster. The stain outlasted the marriage, then outlasted the man. The top right drawer stuck, like it always had, a stubborn little protest. I eased it open with the flat of my hand, the wood complaining softly before giving way. Beneath a nest of rubber bands and 2 dried-up pens sat a small tin box, the kind cookies pretend to come in when everyone knows it will end up holding sewing needles or secrets. I set the box on the blotter and fitted the key. It hesitated for a breath that felt like a year, then turned. Paper has a smell when it's been stored a long time, linen and attic and a breath of summer gone. The letters rose in careful stacks tied with red thread, my handwriting marching across the envelopes in a dozen shades of blue and black. Daniel on every one. Some with dates smudged by rain from the year the roof leaked. One with a grease stain from a roast I overbrowned the winter he promised to fix the oven and never did. I slid the first ribbon loose. The top letter was tender, a small mercy sent to a man who would never read it. The day Liam was born, the way his fists unfurled like starfish, the way Daniel cried hard and fast and then pretended he hadn't. The next was angry, clipped words and corners pressed too hard, 2 Decembers later when he missed the school recital because the game ran long. A handful were terrified, the way fear writes with a lighter hand, as if whispering could keep a thing from hearing its own name. The one from the week after his accident was just ink bled into paper because language had temporarily left me. I didn't send them because sending makes things immovable. Unsent, they were part prayer, part evidence, part map. A draft from the vent lifted the topmost pages like breath through hair. I weighed them down with the old paperweight, an iron sparrow whose wings were forever half open, and kept reading. The years flickered past my fingers in uneven rhythm, summer sticky with lemonade and grass stains, winters of budgets and quiet arguments in the doorway where Liam couldn't hear. Beneath the older pages lay newer ones. The ink was surer. My hand had learned to tell the truth without flinching. The letter dated 3 months ago was only 3 lines. I planted tomatoes too close to the fence again. I still overwater. I still overlove. Grace lost another tooth. She keeps the tiny treasure under her pillow and wakes to bigger bills she's not allowed to spend. Jodie says it's motivational. I say it's a theft of wonder. I set it aside and found the one from 2 weeks ago, the paper still stiff, the sentence a narrow bridge I'd been afraid to walk. I think Jodie is trying to turn Liam against me. No flourish. No apology. I had written it fast, as if getting it down might pin the thought to the page instead of my chest. Reading it now, in the quiet lamplight, I felt the same prickle along my scalp I'd felt when I wrote it, like walking into a room you thought was empty and realizing someone had been sitting in the dark the entire time. I stacked the letters carefully, their edges imperfect, their weight unbelievable for something so light. How many arguments had I avoided by writing instead of speaking? How many truths had I postponed because ink couldn't look me in the eye and argue back? The box's felt liner had worn thin at the corners where my fingers always searched. I pressed there now, and the double bottom clicked. A thinner compartment eased up, a whisper of cardboard against tin. Inside was a single envelope, cream and heavy, sealed in wax I didn't remember melting. The front carried Liam's name in the version of my handwriting I use when I want to be sure I will be understood, each letter distinct as a promise. For Liam, when you're ready. My thumb hovered over the seal. In the mirror of the desk's glass, my face looked older and less kind, and maybe that was the point. Love had made me too gentle with the truth. Fear had made me clumsy. Whatever rested in that envelope, what Daniel wrote, what I added, what I'd decided, was a blade wrapped in velvet. It could cut, or it could free. I set it down, very carefully, as if it might startle. The house creaked again, a small, sympathetic sound. Somewhere outside, a train pulled a long line of night behind it and threaded the town with distance. I put the letters back in their stack. Retied the red thread with hands that didn't feel entirely steady. closed the hidden compartment but not the box, not yet. The key lay warm against my palm like a small animal refusing to be set down. People think secrets rot in dark places. Sometimes they ripen. I turned off the lamp. In the doorway, shadows gathered into a familiar shape, the place where Daniel once leaned and made me laugh when there was nothing funny to say. I didn't look up. I didn't speak to empty rooms anymore. In the hall, I slipped the chain back over my head and pressed the key to my sternum, where a prayer might go if I still believed prayers needed addresses. The study behind me settled into silence, the kind that isn't empty so much as waiting. The phone rang just as the kettle began to sing. I almost didn't answer. Lately, phone calls had become less about connection and more about negotiation, but when I saw Liam's name, my hand moved before my mind could protest. "Hi, Mom." No speakerphone echo. No bright, managerial "Hi, Mara" from Jodie in the background. Just Liam. His voice was quieter than I remembered, as if he were speaking from inside a room with the curtains drawn. "Jodie wants us all over Sunday," he said. "She says it's important." Important. In Jodie's vocabulary, that could mean anything from announcing a promotion to showing off a new set of kitchen tiles. But Liam's pause told me it was neither. "And you?" I asked, letting the question carry weight. "Do you want me there?" There was a silence, and in it, I could almost hear him leaning against the wall, pressing the phone tighter to his ear the way he used to when he was a teenager sneaking calls past bedtime. "Yes," he said finally. "I think, yes. And Grace will be there." Grace. The name was a sudden ache and a burst of light at the same time. My granddaughter, with the wild curls and the laugh that came in bursts, like she was surprised by her own happiness. I hadn't seen her in person for 6 months, not since the afternoon she came to my house, clinging to her father's hand, and Jodie called from the car that it was time to go after only 10 minutes. I told Liam I'd be there. He exhaled like he'd been holding the breath since the call began. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the kettle screaming behind me, steam curling against my face. Sunday. 4 days away. I could already feel the way Jodie's eyes would skim me like I was a piece of furniture she hadn't decided whether to keep. I could already see Grace's small face tilted toward her father, waiting for permission before she moved toward me. I thought of the box in the study, the cream envelope sealed in wax. It sat like a stone in my mind. There was a part of me that wanted to bring it, to place it on their perfect dining table between the wine glasses and the cutlery, to let the truth sit there like an unexploded shell. But I knew better. Truths are like knives, you don't hand one over unless you're certain of who will be holding it. So no, I wouldn't bring the envelope. Not yet. But I would bring something. Something smaller. Something that would look harmless in Jodie's eyes but mean the world to Grace. I went to the cedar chest in my bedroom and lifted the lid. The scent of lavender sachets and old wood rose up. My hands found the worn red storybook Daniel used to read to Liam at bedtime, the one Liam had once begged me to save forever for his future children. The cover was frayed, the gold lettering dulled by time, but the pages were still whole. Grace had never heard these stories from me. She didn't know the voices I'd saved for each character. But maybe she would. I traced the title with my thumb, hearing Daniel's voice in my memory and Liam's smaller one echoing back. Sunday would be a battlefield, but even battlefields have quiet corners. I closed the chest and set the book on my nightstand, where I wouldn't forget it. The driveway looked freshly swept, the flower beds trimmed into submission. Jodie's idea of welcoming was a house that looked like a magazine spread, polished, controlled, no room for accidents. I climbed the front steps with the storybook tucked under my arm, its worn red cover hidden inside a gift bag. My knuckles rapped against the door, and almost immediately it swung open. Mara. Jodie's voice was honey on the surface, vinegar underneath. She leaned in with a kiss that landed on the air beside my cheek. The perfume was strong enough to make my eyes water. You made it. I said I would. She stepped aside, the perfect hostess, though her eyes flicked toward the gift bag like a customs officer scanning luggage. The living room was warm in color but cold in feeling, all cream and glass, no softness. The family photographs that had once dotted the shelves were gone, replaced by abstract art in muted colors. I scanned the mantel. The wedding photo of me and Daniel was missing, the one where we were both laughing too hard for the camera. Where's the photo? I asked before I could stop myself. Jodie glanced over her shoulder as she walked toward the dining room. It didn't fit the new decor. I put it in storage. The words landed sharp. Storage. That's where you put things you don't want to look at but can't quite throw away. Liam came in from the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks. Mom, he said, smiling, a little too wide. He kissed my cheek, but his eyes darted toward Jodie, as if checking for approval. And then I saw her. Grace. She stood halfway down the hall, peeking out from behind her father's leg. She'd grown taller, her curls a little wilder, but her eyes, those gray-green eyes, were the same. Hi, sweetheart, I said softly. She smiled, quick and shy, but her hand tightened around Liam's leg. She didn't move toward me. She was waiting for a signal that didn't come. Jodie clapped her hands lightly. Let's sit. Dinner's almost ready, and I want to tell you all something. I followed them into the dining room. The table was set like a magazine shoot, linen napkins folded into swans, silver polished to a mirror. I noticed the place cards. Mine was at the far end, angled so I'd have to crane my neck to meet anyone's eyes. I slid into my seat without comment. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful move was not reacting. Grace was seated beside Jodie, not beside me. The distance felt deliberate. The smell of roasted chicken drifted in from the kitchen, but underneath it I could feel the tension, fine as fishing line, strung tight between the three adults at the table. I rested my hand on the gift bag in my lap, feeling the corners of the storybook through the paper. I'd brought it for Grace, but I already knew I'd have to wait for the right moment. In this house, even gifts had to be smuggled like contraband. Jodie poured wine like she was auditioning for a commercial, slow, steady, the bottle label perfectly facing forward. She set the glass in front of me last, her nails clicking softly against the crystal. I've been thinking a lot about the future, she began, resting her manicured hands on the table as if she were about to lead a board meeting. About all of our futures. Across from me, Liam shifted in his seat. Jodie's gaze moved to me, warm on the surface, unblinking underneath. Mara, with your health, and the size of that old house, we just think it might be better if you moved into an assisted living place. The sentence was dressed in care but sewn with control. I kept my tone even. And by we, you mean? She didn't flinch. Liam and I have talked about it. We could help sell the house, manage your things. It would be less stress for you, and, she glanced at Liam for emphasis, it would give Grace a more secure future. Grace's fork paused halfway to her mouth, though I doubted she understood what was really being discussed. Secure, I repeated. Meaning? Meaning, Jodie said, her voice still sugar-sweet, that your house is worth quite a lot, and that money could be invested. You wouldn't have to worry about bills, and we could make sure it was used wisely. In other words, hand it over. I took a sip of my wine to give myself a second. That's generous of you. Liam finally spoke, his voice careful. Mom, we just want what's best for you. I looked at my son, my boy who once swore he'd take care of me the way I took care of him, and saw a man caught between guilt and convenience. I smiled. Well, it's kind of you to offer. And I'd be happy to think about it. But in the meantime, I leaned back, making my voice as casual as possible. I could use some help with a few little things. The shelf in the hallway needs fixing, and the light bulb on the porch has gone out. Oh, and I don't have a ride to my doctor's appointment next week. I watched the information land. Jodie's smile tightened a fraction. Home repairs and errand running weren't the kind of help she liked to give. Of course, she said, though her tone suggested she'd already be too busy. Liam nodded, more out of reflex than commitment. I can try to work something out. Good, I said, folding my hands. Let's see how we manage those little things first. Then we can talk about the big ones. Under the table, my fingers brushed against the gift bag holding Grace's storybook. I didn't take it out yet. Not here. Not now. The following morning, I woke to the sound of rain ticking against the windows, the kind of soft, steady rain that made the world feel slowed down. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the shelf Liam hadn't fixed, the porch light that still sat dark. I didn't expect either would change anytime soon. Which was fine, I had other errands to run. By 10 a.m. the rain had thinned to mist, and I was on the road. Not toward the grocery store or the doctor's office like I told my neighbor, but west, toward a post office in a neighboring town, tucked between a laundromat and a barber shop that still had a red and white pole spinning out front. It had been years since I'd been here. The parking lot was cracked, grass pushing through the seams, and the blue mailbox out front leaned like it had lost the will to stand straight. Inside, the place smelled like paper and damp wool. The clerk didn't look up from her crossword when I walked past the counter and down the narrow hallway to the wall of small metal doors. Box 714. The key from my other chain slid in smooth as butter, like no time had passed at all. I pulled out a small, dented tin strongbox, lighter than I remembered, but still heavy enough to make my arm ache. I tucked it under my coat and walked quickly back to the car. It wasn't until I was home, with the rain starting up again against the glass, that I set the box on the kitchen table and unlocked it. Inside were neat bundles of papers, bank statements with balances underlined in Daniel's bold handwriting, receipts from the hardware store, even old postcards we'd sent to each other on trips, thinking of you in Chicago, don't forget to water the roses. But under those, there was a single envelope. My name on the front. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. The postmark was from 2003, the year he died. 2 weeks before his accident. I opened it carefully, the paper soft from years of waiting. Mara. You don't know me, but you know my husband. Or you think you do. My name is Helen. I was Daniel's first wife. We married in 1972 and divorced in 75, after he gambled away our savings and disappeared with the rest. I heard later he remarried. I told myself it was none of my business. But lately, I've learned things. I've learned he was still moving money, still hiding it. And some of it might belong to you. I'm not writing for revenge. I'm writing because I think you deserve to know the man you married, all of him. Helen M. I read it 3 times. My coffee had gone cold, my pulse beating in my fingertips. Daniel had never mentioned a Helen. Never mentioned being married before me at all. The box sat open in front of me, the letter lying like a fresh wound across its contents. The rain on the windows sounded sharper now, like 1,000 small knocks. I didn't leave the kitchen table for almost an hour. The letter from Helen lay there, its creased folds opening like a mouth that had waited decades to speak. I'd read it so many times I could almost recite it, and still my eyes went back to certain words, gambled away, disappeared, still hiding it. The paper trembled slightly between my fingers, though whether from anger or the echo of old grief, I couldn't tell. Daniel. The man who'd brushed my hair off my face when I was in labor, who'd fixed Grace's tricycle seat with duct tape and a whistle under his breath, who'd kissed me like he meant it every morning before work, apparently also the man who'd lived another life I knew nothing about. I pushed the letter aside and went back to the tin box. Under the neat stacks of bank statements was a smaller bundle of papers, folded but not sealed. They were stapled together, the top sheet marked Loan Agreement, 1975. Helen's name was there in black and white, alongside Daniel's. A loan for $15,000, a fortune in that year, from her parents' savings account. The pages after that told the rest of the story without needing Helen's handwriting to fill in the blanks. Default notices, demand letters, and finally, a police report for theft. And then, nothing. The trail just stopped. I sat back, my stomach twisting. If Helen was telling the truth, and the documents were proof she was, then Daniel hadn't just left her. He'd taken her family's money and vanished. I thought about our first date. How he'd insisted on paying for everything, sliding crisp bills out of a wallet that looked too new for the way he dressed. I thought about the first apartment we'd shared, how the security deposit had come from a lucky streak at poker with the guys from work. I'd laughed back then. I didn't laugh now. The kettle whistled faintly from the stove. I'd put it on at some point, my hands working on autopilot. I poured the water over a tea bag, watching the color seep into the cup, as if the leaves might tell me what to do next. There was another page in the box, one I almost missed because it was tucked inside a folded grocery list. Daniel's handwriting this time, rushed and uneven. Mara. If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to explain. Yes, I was married before you. Yes, I made mistakes, the kind you can't fix with apologies. I thought I could outrun them. I couldn't. The past has a way of following you, even when you change your name and your story. There is money. It's not all mine to keep. Some belongs to Grace now. Keep it from the wrong hands. You'll know what that means. D. I stared at the words until they blurred. Grace. Not Liam. Grace. Why her? And why hide it from his own son? The obvious answer rose in my mind like something bloated from the deep, because Daniel didn't trust Liam's mother. That was 25 years ago. But now, the wrong hands could just as easily be Jodie's. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to push back the pressure building behind them. I'd spent years protecting my family from things I thought would hurt them. Now I wasn't sure if I'd been protecting them or keeping them ignorant. I reached for the phone and dialed the number from Helen's letter. It rang twice before a voice answered. Older now, but still with a hint of the southern lilt the address on the envelope suggested. Hello? Is this Helen M? I stopped. My own voice sounded strange in my ears, like I was calling from a long way off. This is Mara Callahan, Daniel's second wife. Silence. Then, I wondered if you'd ever call. We spoke for nearly an hour. She told me about meeting Daniel when they were both barely out of school, about how charming he was, how quickly he swept her into marriage and debt. She told me about the nights he didn't come home, the phone calls from strangers, the final fight when she realized her parents' retirement fund was gone. I was angry for a long time, she said. But I was also young, and part of me still loved him. That's the dangerous part, loving someone who's dangerous to love. When I told her about Liam, about Grace, about the letter in the box, she went quiet for a long stretch. Mara, she said finally, if there's money in Grace's name, and you think someone might take it, you need to protect that girl. Because once people like Jodie get a taste for control, they don't stop. They just find new ways to get what they want. I promised I would. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, the tin box still open, the letter from Helen lying on top. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy. Outside, a single drop slid down the window pane, cutting a slow path through the condensation. I traced the envelope with my fingertips, the one marked for Liam, "When you're ready." My hand hovered over the wax seal, then pulled away. Not yet. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that makes the air look tired. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table for hours, the tin box pushed just far enough away that I could ignore it if I tried, which I didn't. The letter from Helen lay open, Daniel's hurried note beside it. Every few minutes I found myself reading a line again, as if the words might change if I caught them off guard. The knock on the door startled me. 3 short raps, no doorbell. When I opened it, Liam stood there in his work jacket, his hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it in the car. "Hey," he said, almost sheepishly. "Was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check in." That wasn't like him. If Liam visited without Jodie, there was a reason, and usually it wasn't a good one. I stepped aside. "Come in. Coffee's still warm." He followed me into the kitchen, pausing when he saw the tin box on the table. The way his eyes snagged on it, I knew. "You've been going through Dad's things?" His voice was casual, but his gaze was too steady. "I've been revisiting some old memories," I said. "Where'd you get that box?" "Why?" He shrugged, but it was too practiced. "Jodie was just wondering what you kept after he passed. She said you probably had some old financial papers lying around. Stuff that should be organized. You know, in case you ever," he stopped, but I knew where the sentence was going, "in case you ever moved into assisted living." "Did Jodie ask you to come over?" I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. I mean, she mentioned it, but I wanted to see you, Mom." I smiled faintly, though inside I felt the old reflex, the one that used to keep my face calm when Daniel came home smelling of whiskey and said everything was fine. "It's just some keepsakes," I told him, closing the box lid with deliberate slowness. "Nothing you or Jodie need to worry about." "Still," he said, "maybe I could take a look sometime. Just in case there's anything important." I sipped my coffee, letting the steam rise between us. "If there's anything important, Liam, I promise you'll know." He shifted in his chair. "She thinks you've been under a lot of stress lately. That maybe you're not thinking about the future as clearly as you should." My fingers tightened around the mug. Not thinking clearly, Jodie's favorite way of planting seeds. It was the first step toward making someone else the decision maker. I set the cup down and leaned forward. "Liam, do you think I'm not thinking clearly?" His eyes darted to the box, then back to me. I think maybe you've got things on your mind you're not sharing." "That's not the same thing." We sat there in a silence that was too full. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, measuring out the space between us. Finally, he glanced at his watch. "I should get going." "Dinner plans?" "With Jodie?" He nodded. I walked him to the door, but before he stepped out, I touched his arm. "Liam, sometimes people want to know what you have, not who you are. Be careful which one you think they love." His brows knit together. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll figure it out," I said, and closed the door before he could answer. Through the window, I watched him walk to his car. He didn't look back. I returned to the kitchen and rested my hand on the tin box. His reaction had told me more than words could. Jodie knew about it, and Liam wasn't ready to admit that. It happened faster than I expected. 2 days after Liam's visit, my phone rang just after lunch. The number was Jodie's, but the voice that answered sounded as though it had been honed on glass. Mara, can you stop by this afternoon? I think we should clear the air. The clear the air part was delivered like a warning. I almost said no, but then I remembered Helen's letter, Daniel's note, and the way Liam's eyes had clung to the tin box like a magnet. If Jodie wanted to have this talk, I wanted it on my turf. You're welcome to come here, I said. I'll make tea. Her pause was thin but sharp. Fine. 2:00. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:00. Jodie stepped in wearing a blazer so tailored it could have cut glass, her perfume arriving a second before she did. She didn't bother with small talk. I'll be blunt, she said, standing in my hallway like she owned the place. We're concerned. Liam and I both. About what? About you. About your ability to manage things on your own. The house, the bills, your assets. She glanced deliberately toward the study door, where the tin box sat behind it like a guarded animal. My assets are fine, I said. Are they? She smiled, but her voice was all teeth. Because if you're keeping things in that box that could help this family, it's selfish not to share. Especially when Grace's future is at stake. The mention of Grace made my jaw tighten. Grace's future is my business, I said evenly. Jodie's eyes flickered, just for a second, like I'd brushed a nerve. You know, if something happened to you, there's no telling who might get control of certain things. Liam should be prepared. What exactly are you prepared for, Jodie? Her smile flattened. To take care of what you clearly can't. To make sure nothing gets lost. The room felt smaller. My pulse was steady, but under it was that old, familiar chill, the one I'd felt the night I found out Daniel had taken a business trip that never existed. You seem very interested in a box you've never seen, I said. Her chin lifted a fraction. I don't need to see it to know it's important. And frankly, if you have money or property that you're hiding, it's irresponsible not to let Liam manage it. The mask was slipping. I could see it now, the control, the calculation, the entitlement that had been simmering under her polite smile since the day we met. I leaned back in my chair. And if I refuse? Jodie's gaze sharpened. Then we'll have to make decisions without you. I let the silence stretch until it started to pull at the edges of her confidence. That's an interesting threat, I said at last. But you might want to be careful. Careful? Because you have no idea what's in that box. And you have no idea how much of it I've already made copies of. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. You're being dramatic. I smiled. No. I'm being protective. There's a difference. Her eyes locked on mine, and for the first time since she walked in, she didn't have an immediate response. I stood, walking to the study door and opening it just enough for her to see the tin box on the desk. Here's what you should understand, Jodie, I said quietly. That box has more in it than money. It has history. And history has a way of exposing the people who try to rewrite it. Her lips parted, to argue, to threaten, I'm not sure which, but I didn't give her the chance. Now, I said, opening the front door, you should go. We'll see each other Sunday. I imagine it'll be important. She stepped out onto the porch, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. You're making a mistake, Mara. Maybe, I said. But at least it'll be mine. I closed the door on her perfume and leaned against it, feeling the wood cool against my back. The house felt too still after Jodie left, the air holding on to her perfume like a bad memory. I stood in the hall a long time, my hand on the study door, listening to the quiet. If I was going to fight her, I needed to know exactly what I was protecting. Not just for me, but for Grace. I went inside, sat at the desk, and pulled the tin box closer. The wax seal on the cream envelope caught the light, a dull, uneven red. For Liam, when you're ready. Daniel's handwriting, the steady kind he used when he was afraid someone might misunderstand him. I held the envelope for a moment before sliding a letter opener under the seal. The wax cracked softly, a sound like the first twig breaking in a forest where you thought you were alone. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. Daniel's words filled the page in neat lines, the ink darker at the starts of sentences where he'd pressed harder. Mara. I never told you about Helen, not the whole truth. You deserved it, but I thought keeping the past buried would keep you safe. I was wrong. When I left her, I took money that wasn't mine. Some of it I lost. Some of it I kept hidden for years, moving it through accounts under other names. Not proud of it, but there it is. When Grace was born, I put what was left into a trust in her name. My way of giving her something clean, something untouched by all my mistakes. You're the trustee. No one else knows. Not even Liam. You need to protect it from the wrong hands. You'll know who they are. Don't let guilt or family ties blind you. If this letter reaches you, it means I didn't have time to explain in person. It also means I'm trusting you to do what I couldn't, keep her safe. D. I read it twice, my throat tightening with each line. Not even Liam knew. And Daniel, for all his flaws, for all his betrayals, had trusted me with this one last thing. The room seemed smaller, the shadows darker. The trust wasn't just money, it was a lifeline for Grace, one that Jodie would cut without hesitation if she ever found it. I thought about the way Jodie had said Grace's future in my kitchen, her voice thick with the kind of false benevolence that hides hunger. I thought about Liam, torn in two directions, too willing to believe the voice he hears most often. And I thought about Grace, how she hadn't come to me at Sunday dinner, how she'd glanced at her mother before deciding whether to smile. The weight of the envelope in my hands felt like a living thing. I could almost hear Daniel's voice in the back of my head, you'll know who they are. I did know. I slid the letter back into the envelope and locked it inside the hidden compartment of the box. My hands didn't shake this time. The next move wouldn't be about defending myself. It would be about setting a trap. I waited 3 days before making the call. Long enough for Jodie to think our conversation had shaken me, but not so long that she'd lose interest. Why don't you both come by Saturday? I told her. I've thought over what you said. There are some papers I'd like to go through together. Her answer came too quickly. We'll be there. Saturday arrived with a heavy, gray sky. I set the stage carefully, teacups and biscuits on the coffee table, the tin box on the desk in plain sight. Beside it, I placed a cream envelope that looked exactly like the one from Daniel, though inside it was nothing but a folded grocery list. And in the corner, hidden by the shade of the standing lamp, was the small recorder I'd once used for dictating recipes. Fresh batteries, red light off. Ready. At exactly 2 o'clock, Jodie's car crunched up the driveway. She came in alone, heels clicking across the floorboards, her smile perfectly practiced. I'm glad you came, I said, my voice warm. I've decided it's time to be transparent. Her eyes went straight to the box. She sat forward on the couch before I'd even offered her tea. That's probably for the best. I gestured to the envelope. This was something Daniel left behind. It has implications for the family. But before we open it, I need to understand where we all stand. She tilted her head, smiling in a way that was meant to look patient but didn't reach her eyes. Mara, you know where we stand. We want what's best for everyone. Especially Grace. Of course, I said. But best for her, or best for you? Her voice softened, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. For her. But if I manage it properly, we can make sure all of us benefit. That's only fair. Benefit, I repeated slowly, letting the word hang. She leaned in, lowering her voice. You've been sitting on things you don't need. If you won't use them to help, then I will. Grace is my daughter, I'll secure her future. Even if that means taking something that wasn't meant for you? Her smile sharpened. It's all meant for me, one way or another. You can do this the easy way, or I'll make the decisions without you. The recorder caught every word. I slid the envelope across the table. Go ahead. Open it. Her eyes gleamed as she tore it open, only to find herself holding a crumpled grocery list. Her head snapped up. What the hell is this? Transparency, I said softly. You've just made yourself perfectly clear. Her face flushed. You set me up. No, I said, standing. I gave you the chance to be honest. And you were. That's the good news. Her voice sharpened. And the bad news? I smiled. The bad news is that you set it into a recorder. Her eyes flicked to the lamp, realization dawning too late. By Sunday morning, the recording was in Liam's inbox, no message, no explanation, just Jodie's own voice, raw and unvarnished. The day dragged on, heavy and airless, until the knock came at dusk. Not polite this time, but 3 hard bangs that rattled the frame. When I opened the door, Liam stood there with the recorder in his hand, his eyes red, his jaw tight. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was rough, not angry yet, but standing on the edge of it. I stepped back to let him in. Because you weren't ready to hear it. I'm ready now. We went into the kitchen. He dropped into the chair across from me like a man carrying something heavy. She said you're keeping things from us, he murmured. That Grace's future is at risk if you don't let her manage it. And you made her say it on tape? No, Liam, I said quietly. She made herself say it. I just gave her the space. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. God, Mom. I thought you two just didn't get along. I didn't think she'd, his words trailed off, unfinished. You didn't think she'd see your daughter as a resource instead of a person. His head snapped up, raw pain in his eyes. What's in that box, Mom? Something your father left for Grace. Not for you. Not for Jodie. For Grace. And you know now she'd take it the second she could. The silence stretched, heavy but different than before, not wary anymore, but building towards something inevitable. Finally, his voice was steady, resolved. Grace stays with me. Jodie's gone. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a decision made in the moment. It was a truth that had just crystallized. A lump rose in my throat. You know that won't be easy. His jaw tightened. Neither is watching my daughter lose her wonder. He nodded, the movement slow and deliberate. Better hard now than harder later. For the first time in months, I saw him without the thin film of Jodie's influence clouding his expression. He looked tired. Older. But also, free. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Then we do this together. For Grace. His fingers tightened around mine, just once, before he pulled away and stood. I have to get her. Tonight. When the door closed behind him, the house was quiet again, but it felt different. Not empty. Not waiting. Somewhere in town, Jodie was about to hear the words that would break her version of our family apart. Jodie didn't go quietly. By Monday morning, my phone was buzzing with messages, some from numbers I didn't recognize, others from Jodie herself. The first was polite, almost reasonable, Liam's overreacting. We can talk this out. An hour later, it sharpened, you've poisoned him against me. You're going to regret this. By noon, the mask was gone entirely, you've ruined your son's marriage, you bitter old witch. I didn't reply to any of them. Liam called that evening. His voice was tired but steady. It's done. She's gone to her sister's for now. Says she'll get a lawyer. Will she fight for Grace? I asked. Maybe. But I've got the recording. And the trust thing. Mom, that changes everything. If a judge hears she tried to take something meant for her own daughter, he stopped himself, like the thought was too big to finish. It won't go well for her. Then we'll hold on to that. 2 days later, Liam's car pulled into my driveway. This time, Grace climbed out with him. She clutched a small backpack, the straps twisted in her hands. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice soft. She hesitated only a moment before walking over. When she hugged me, it wasn't the quick, polite squeeze from before. It was warm. Real. "Daddy says we're staying here for a while," she murmured into my shoulder. I smiled against her curls. I like the sound of that. The first week was quiet. Grace slept in the guest room, her drawings already taped to the walls. We planted tomatoes in the backyard, just the way I used to with Liam when he was her age. She laughed when the dirt got under her fingernails, and I didn't tell her to wash it off right away. At night, I'd hear her footsteps in the hall, sometimes pausing outside my door, sometimes moving straight to her father's. Slowly, the pauses grew longer, and one night, she knocked. "Can I sleep here?" she asked. I lifted the blanket, and she curled beside me, her small body warm against mine. In the dark, I told her the beginning of the red storybook tale, the one Liam had loved as a boy. Her breathing slowed before I reached the second page. Liam spent more evenings at the kitchen table, talking about Grace's school, about the repairs the house needed, about how strange it was to cook for 3 instead of following Jodie's strict routines. One night, after Grace had gone to bed, he looked at me over his mug of tea. "You were right. I didn't want to see it, but, you were right." I met his eyes. "It's not about being right. It's about keeping her safe." He nodded. "Then we keep her safe. Together." Somewhere out there, Jodie was planning her next move, I could feel it. But here, inside these walls, we were building something again. Not what we had before. Maybe not perfect. But real. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like it was waiting for a storm. It felt like it was holding the 3 of us, and that was enough. It was nearly midnight when I finally sat alone in the study, the house breathing in its slow, night rhythm. Liam and Grace had been asleep for hours. The quiet felt different now, not hollow, but full of something I didn't want to lose. The tin box sat open on the desk. Inside, Daniel's letter to me lay beside the cream envelope he'd meant for Liam. I'd read them both so many times they'd become part of me, yet they still carried the same weight as the first time I touched them. But tonight, there was something I needed to add. I took out a fresh sheet of paper, uncapped my pen, and began to write, "Grace, one day, you'll be old enough to understand why your father and I made the choices we did. When that day comes, this letter will be here, along with the others. They'll tell you about your grandfather, about the mistakes he made and the good he tried to do at the end. They'll tell you how people can be both, and how that doesn't make their love less real, but it does make it complicated. The trust your grandfather left you is yours alone. You don't owe it to anyone, not even family. Especially not family who tries to convince you they know better. You will meet people who dress their greed up as concern. You will hear voices that sound like love but speak in control. I hope by then you'll know the difference. Most of all, I hope you remember that the real inheritance is not money or property, it's the people who stand beside you when there's nothing to gain from it. That's the wealth you guard the hardest. With all my love, Grandma Mara." I read it twice before folding it neatly and slipping it into a new envelope. Across the front, I wrote her name in the same careful hand Daniel had once used for Liam's. Then I placed it in the hidden compartment of the box, alongside the rest. For a moment, I let my hand rest on the lid before closing it. In that touch, there was a strange mix of endings and beginnings, Daniel's past closing, Grace's future opening, and my own heart caught somewhere between the two. I locked the box and slid the key back onto its chain, tucking it under my blouse. It sat warm against my skin, the way it always had, but tonight it felt lighter somehow. From down the hall came the faint sound of Grace turning in her sleep. I pictured her small body curled under the quilt, safe, unaware of the storms she'd just been steered away from. I smiled to myself. Jodie might try again, I had no illusions about that. But now, I had more than secrets. I had allies. I had proof. And I had a plan. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of pale winter day where the sun never fully wakes. The doorbell rang at 8 a.m., sharp, insistent. When I opened it, Jodie stood there. No makeup, no heels, just a gray coat and eyes that looked like they'd been awake all night. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't move. "About what?" She pushed past me into the foyer. "About ending this. About what it's going to take for you to stop turning Liam against me." I closed the door slowly, letting the latch click. "You mean what it's going to take for me to hand over what's in that box?" Her jaw tightened. "You can't keep it forever. I'll find a way. Court, lawyers, whatever it takes." I walked past her, into the study, and gestured toward the desk. The tin box sat there in plain sight, the key already in the lock. "You want it?" I asked. "Here it is." She stared at me, suspicious. "Just like that?" "Just like that." She crossed the room and flipped the lid. Inside was a neat stack of papers, nothing but photocopies of garden supply receipts, birthday cards, and old grocery lists. Her face darkened. "What is this?" "It's what you've been chasing," I said. "Nothing. Because the real contents are somewhere you'll never touch them." She slammed the lid shut. "You think you've won?" "I know I have." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "You see, I don't just have the recording. I have witnesses. People who know about the trust, who know your intentions. Even if you tried to twist the story, you'd only be tightening the rope around your own neck." Her lips parted, but no words came. I leaned in just enough for her to feel the weight behind my next sentence. "And Liam? He's done protecting you. He's protecting Grace now. That's the move you never saw coming." Her eyes flickered, hurt, rage, something else, and then she straightened her coat. "This isn't over." "It is," I said. "You just don't like the ending." She left without slamming the door, which told me more than shouting would have. The silence she left behind was deep, final. I went to the desk and opened the bottom drawer, where the real tin box sat hidden behind a stack of books. The key turned smooth and certain, revealing the letters, Daniel's confession, and my note to Grace, all safe. I closed it again, locking it with a click that felt like the closing of a chapter. That evening, Grace sat on the couch with me, the red storybook open across both our laps. Liam was in the kitchen, humming as he made dinner. As I read aloud, Grace's head rested on my arm, her breathing slow and even. I could feel the steady beat of her trust, warm and unguarded. For the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't waiting for the next move. I'd made it. And I'd won. Some victories aren't loud. They're quiet enough to fit between the lines of a bedtime story, passed down so the next player will always know the game.